That is a pile of dirt. Not just any pile though, this is Craig's pile. Oh, who's Craig? Craig is my roommate. He doesn't take up a lot of space, but he also just sits there doing nothing really, like nothing useful to society. He just roams around in his dirt pile with the rest of his siblings who also do nothing useful. But with the rent being so high here in New York, what if there was a way to get Craig and all his siblings a real job? Sorry for the silly intro, but what I'm proposing is not silly at all. We employ bacteria all the time to make stuff we need. They work in what are called Microbial Cell Factories, or MCFs if you want to sound smart.
Yes, I invest half of my stocks in MCFs.
Well, what exactly is a Microbial Cell Factory and what do they make? Well, MCFs are quite simple and they generally fall into two categories. There are MCFs that just use microbes as they are, since what they naturally produce is valuable to we humans. Think of things like yeast producing carbon dioxide to help bread rise, or lactobacillus making yogurt by fermenting sugars in milk into lactic acid. Fruit production is one of the oldest and most common ways we use microbial cell factories, but the second category is far more interesting. What if we could train bacteria to make other things that are useful? I mean, we already make dogs go to work, we make zoo and aquarium animals work all the time, we used to make horses and donkeys go to work until they got together and invented tractors, so why not train bacteria too? The truth is, we already figured out how. Back in school, your teacher probably told you your cells are like factories, where each organelle or specialized cell structure had its own job. These organelles work together to keep the cell alive by breaking down things and making new things whenever necessary. Just like a real factory, they act like different departments, working together to keep the cycle going. It's a simple analogy, but it's quite effective. Almost as effective as me asking you to sub to this channel if you're enjoying this video. But it turns out we can get the cell factory to make things it had no idea how to make before. This is the field known as industrial microbiology, and it's a field we rely on for our food, our medicine, our agriculture, and chemicals. Using living organisms to make products rather than traditional synthetic chemistry provides a few different advantages. For one, maintaining microbes is not typically energy intensive. They are also really efficient since all the things they need to produce the desired product is self-contained. They just require a proper food source, usually something high in sugar content, like corn for instance. You also don't need all these complex reactors and piping to produce this product when the bacteria comes as an all-in-one package. Another advantage is specificity, which is a big deal when it comes to medications. Many medicinal compounds are chiral, meaning they have a certain handedness to them. Without getting into the weeds, microbial cell factories are great at producing the right version of a medicine to ensure it works properly. What you see in front of you is the chemical structure of insulin. Insulin is a hormone your body uses to regulate the amount of glucose or sugar in your bloodstream. It does this by helping the glucose enter your cells where it can be used for energy or stored for later. But if you're like the 415 million people who suffer from diabetes, then you either don't make enough of your own insulin or you struggle with regulating the amount of insulin your body has, which means you need that insulin from somewhere. This used to come from animals like pigs and cows, since their insulin is identical to ours. Since we were eating them anyways, we learned how to remove insulin from their glands that would be thrown away and use it to treat diabetes patients. But what we've also learned is how to make bacteria do the same thing. Human insulin is made by either E. coli or by this thing. I'm not going to even pretend to know how to say that. You really need to fire the science name guy. Anyways, we did this by using what's known as recombinant DNA. In simple terms, this involves taking out a section of a microbe's DNA and putting in the human gene for insulin we made in the lab. We then shove that DNA back into the microbe, making this a recombinant bacterium. Then you put the recombinant bacterium into a fermentation tank where it makes insulin as part of its normal function. When it's done, you take out the insulin, purify it, and voila, you have human insulin ready for use. It's actually quite remarkable. As long as you feed these microbes, they continue to make insulin. Basically, if they eat, you get to keep eating too. And this doesn't stop at insulin either. With increasing concern with the long-term effects of pesticides, we're using microbial cell factories to make natural versions of these too. One example is Bacillus thuringiensis. Again, the science name guy really needs to do better. BT, because I don't have time for that, is a bacteria that produces delta endotoxins that burns the intestines of flies, caterpillars, and worms. They literally can't eat this stuff because when they take a bite, it's probably their last. This is a toxin that doesn't affect humans at all since we don't have the receptors for it. And according to the Amazon reviews, this stuff works wonders. But if Craig doesn't want to work in agriculture, he could also work in chemical production. Back in the early 1900s, a man by the name of Chaim Weizmann discovered how to use bacteria to make common chemical solvents like acetone, butanol, and ethanol. A British citizen at the time, Weizmann's discovery was pivotal to supporting the Allied forces during World War I, and his work has been expounded on ever since. Though using microbes for this purpose waned with the growth of the petrochemical industry in the 50s and the 60s, microbes are making a comeback like a Marion did. Though making chemicals from crude oil is really cheap, companies are considering moving back to MCFs since they are more environmentally friendly and they don't produce as many toxic byproducts. With the advances in genetic engineering, companies can also use microbes to transform waste gases from chemical and agricultural production into useful products, like turning carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide into chemicals like ethanol rather than venting them into the atmosphere. As you can see, the job market is wide open for Craig because we can use genetic engineering to make microbes do a whole lot of things, which means Craig can finally pitch in on the rent since Morpheus is no help. From vitamin supplements to insulin production to fighting global warming. These tiny factories are more powerful than we think, and before you know it, may even be the best way for us to build factories in space. But before then, we have other issues on Earth that we're using microbes to help us tackle. You can find out more about that in this video on discovering a bacteria that eats plastic. I'm Lumi, thanks for coming to the Benchtop. Don't forget to drop a like before you go, and maybe sub, please? Please? No? Okay. I'm not sad, I'm just disappointed.